There is a subtle fatigue that lives beneath your daily thoughts, a quiet strain that does not come from work or responsibility, but from the tension of trying to manage reality from the outside while feeling uncertain within. You sense it in the small pauses between tasks, in the way your chest tightens when you imagine the future, in the faint background noise of self-evaluation that never seems to turn off. Nothing is dramatically wrong, yet something is not fully aligned. You move, you decide, you plan, and still there remains an undercurrent of instability, as if life is happening to you faster than you can interpret it. This restlessness is not a failure of discipline. It is a symptom of divided consciousness. You have been taught, gently and repeatedly, that the world is a fixed structure into which you must fit yourself. Circumstances appear solid, other people appear autonomous, events seem to arrive uninvited, so you learn to react, to adjust, to anticipate. You develop strategies for control and protection. You measured outcomes and attempted to influence them through visible effort. Yet beneath these adaptations, there remained a quiet suspicion that something deeper governs your experience, something more intimate than environment, more immediate than behavior. What feels misaligned is not your ambition or your desire for change. It is the assumption that change begins outside of you. When your attention is habitually directed toward modifying circumstances while leaving your inner orientation unexamined, you enter into subtle conflict. You attempt to build a different future while silently identifying with an unchanged self. The outer movement and the inner identification do not match. And so reality reflects the deeper allegiance. You may have noticed this pattern in ordinary moments. You speak words of confidence while inwardly bracing for disappointment. You set an intention for peace while replaying grievances in the privacy of your imagination. You pray for provision while quietly rehearsing scarcity. These are not moral failings. They are divisions of awareness. And division weakens coherence. The ancient instruction, be still and know that I am God, is not merely poetic reassurance. It is directional. It turns attention away from visible turbulence and toward the interior seat of identity. Stillness reveals what is actually operating within you. Not what you say you believe, not what you wish were true, but what you consent to as yourself. The state you call I am is not a description. It is a habitation. Consciousness is not passive observation. It is participation. Every time you inwardly affirm, even silently, this is just how things are for me, you are not commenting on reality. You are aligning with a state, and alignment is creative. Awareness organizes perception, and perception organizes action, and action reinforces environment. The cycle appears external, yet it begins in identity. This is the principle that has been overlooked. Your lived world arranges itself around the state of consciousness you quietly agree to embody. Not the state you occasionally visit in hope, not the state you perform for others, the one you return to when no one is watching, the one that feels familiar, the one that feels like you. You do not create by strain. You create by consent. Consider how effortlessly you maintain certain expectations. You do not work to believe that the sun will rise tomorrow. You do not rehearse arguments to convince yourself of gravity. These assumptions operate beneath thought, and because they are unquestioned, they are stable. In the same way, the assumptions you hold about your worth, your relationships, your opportunities, operate beneath conscious effort. They shape what you notice. They shape what you interpret. They shape what you allow. When Scripture speaks of faith, it is not describing denial of visible facts. It is describing fidelity to an unseen identity. Faith is allegiance to what you accept as ultimately true about yourself in God. If your allegiance is divided, partly anchored in divine sufficiency, partly anchored in inherited limitation, the visible results will mirror the division. The law is impartial. It reflects coherence. You may wonder why certain patterns repeat despite sincere desire for change. It is not because you are being tested or punished. It is because the deeper state remains intact. If you inwardly identify as overlooked, you will interpret neutral interactions as dismissal. If you identify as unsupported, you will overlook subtle gestures of care. If you identify as unworthy, you will deflect opportunity without noticing. The world does not argue with your identity. It confirms it. Notice the quiet power of this. It means that awareness is not a spectator sport. It is formative. Each time you dwell on an inner scene, a memory, a projection, a self-description, you are rehearsing a state. Rehearsal stabilizes identity. Identity directs perception. Perception guides behavior. Behavior shapes environment. The sequence feels complex, yet it originates in a single consent. You do this constantly without realizing it. When you wake and immediately recall yesterday's frustration, your body responds before the day begins. When you anticipate a conversation and imagine being misunderstood, your tone subtly shifts before a word is spoken. When you picture yourself succeeding with quiet certainty, your posture changes without instruction. The outer shift follows the inner agreement. This is not mystical exaggeration. It is psychological continuity. The nervous system responds to imagined experience with measurable changes. The brain does not sharply distinguish between vividly held inner scenes and external events. What you repeatedly inhabit inwardly becomes familiar terrain. Familiarity breeds expectation. Expectation shapes outcome. Yet there is something deeper than neurochemistry at work. Beneath thought and physiology is the mystery of consciousness itself, the awareness in which all experience arises. When Moses asks the divine name and receives the answer, "I am that I am," he is not given a label, but a revelation of being. The name of God is not an object. It is the ground of identity. And when you say "I am," you participate in that ground. This is why the state you attach to "I am" carries creative authority. I am anxious. I am unlucky. I am behind. These are not casual phrases. They are identifications. Each identification invites experience to organize around it, not as punishment, as coherence. To understand this is not to blame yourself for every event. It is to recognize where your agency truly resides. You do not control every circumstance, but you are not powerless in relation to your state. And your state is the lens through which circumstance acquires meaning. There is a difference between observing a difficulty and becoming it. You can experience financial strain without becoming a person who always struggles. You can feel grief without becoming someone who is broken. You can encounter delay without becoming perpetually behind. The event is temporal. The identification is formative. Most people attempt to change events while preserving identification. They attempt to become prosperous while retaining the inner label of one who barely manages. They attempt to become loved while maintaining the inner certainty of one who is eventually left. This produces friction. The outer desire and the inner allegiance move in opposite directions. The invitation is not to force positive language. It is to examine what you are unconsciously loyal to. Loyalty to an identity can feel like honesty. If you have known disappointment, identifying as disappointed may feel accurate. If you have known instability, identifying as unstable may feel realistic. But realism about the past can become prophecy about the future when joined to "I am." You are not asked to deny experience. You are invited to relocate identity. Christ-centered mysticism does not dissolve individuality. It transfigures it. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me, writes Paul. This is not self-erasure. It is a shift of identification from a fragmented self-concept to a deeper ground of being. The outer personality remains, but the inner reference point changes. Instead of "I am what has happened to me," the orientation becomes "I am held in divine sufficiency." This shift is subtle. It does not require dramatic affirmation. It requires quiet, repeated consent. Consent to see yourself as sourced in God rather than in circumstance. Consent to interpret events through sufficiency rather than lack. Consent to return again and again to a stable center. You might notice this in a small moment. You receive a delayed response to a message and feel the impulse to assume rejection. Yet you pause and decline that identification. You experience a financial setback and feel the old narrative rising, yet you choose not to name yourself by it. You sense tension in your body, and instead of labeling yourself an anxious person, you observe the sensation and remain unmerged. These are not minor acts. They are reassignments of identity. When you withdraw consent from a limiting "I am," you create space for a different state to stabilize. At first, the new state may feel unfamiliar. It may feel less convincing than the old narrative. Familiarity is not truth, it is repetition, and repetition can be changed. You do not change by arguing with the old identity. You change by inhabiting a new one consistently enough that it becomes natural. Just as you once rehearsed inadequacy through countless small thoughts, you can rehearse sufficiency through quiet alignment, not loud declarations, not forced emotion, simple return. Return to the awareness that precedes description. Return to the felt sense of being prior to narrative. In that space, before adjectives attach, there is presence. That presence is not anxious. It is not deficient. It is aware, and awareness is spacious. From that spaciousness, you may gently attach a truer identification, not inflated, not grandiose, simply aligned. I am sustained. I am guided. I am capable of learning. I am not alone. Let the words be steady rather than intense. Intensity burns quickly. Steadiness endures. Over time, the nervous system recalibrates around what is repeatedly inhabited. If you consistently return to sufficiency, the body begins to expect stability. If you consistently interpret events through trust, perception begins to filter for support. You will notice opportunities that previously went unseen. You will respond with composure where you once reacted defensively. The world will appear to soften, not because it has been forced to change, but because you are no longer relating from fracture. Manifestation in this light is not the manipulation of events. It is the natural outpicturing of inner coherence. When belief, attention, and identity align, action flows without strain. Decisions feel less conflicted. Relationships feel less charged. Timing feels less adversarial. You are not pushing against life. You are participating in it from wholeness. This coherence cannot be faked. The body reveals division quickly. If you say, I trust, while scanning for danger, your system remains unsettled. If you say, I am worthy, while bracing for abandonment, the inner contradiction persists. The work is not to perfect language. It is to gently notice contradiction and dissolve it through honest realignment. Honesty may involve acknowledging fear without enthroning it. You can say, fear is present, without saying, I am fear. You can say, this is uncertain, without saying, I am doomed. Language shapes allegiance. Allegiance shapes state. As you practice this, you may experience moments of quiet relief. A conversation unfolds more smoothly than expected. A solution appears without overthinking. A sense of support arises unexpectedly. Do not grasp at these as proof. Let them be natural confirmations of alignment. The goal is not to collect evidence. The goal is to remain coherent. Coherence is restful. It reduces internal argument. It removes the need to constantly evaluate yourself. When you are no longer divided between competing identities, energy becomes available. Creativity increases. Compassion becomes easier. Patience extends naturally. You begin to notice that life mirrors your settledness. When you move slowly, others respond more calmly. When you assume goodwill, tension decreases. When you expect provision, ideas emerge. These are not magical events. They are lawful reflections of inner orientation. The law is simple. What you consent to as I am becomes the organizing center of your experience. If this feels weighty, breathe. This is not a demand for perfection. States fluctuate. Emotions rise and fall. The invitation is not to eliminate movement. It is to establish a home base, a stable identification to which you return. That home base is not constructed through imagination alone. It is discovered through stillness. When you sit quietly and allow thoughts to pass without attachment, you begin to sense that awareness itself is untouched by content. Thoughts move. Awareness remains. Sensations change. Awareness remains. This remaining is your ground. From this ground, you can choose consciously what to attach to I am. You are no longer compelled to inherit every passing thought. You are no longer required to fuse with every emotion. You become a steward of identification. Stewardship is gentle responsibility. It does not scold. It tends. When you notice yourself slipping into an old narrative, you do not condemn yourself. You simply withdraw consent and return. Return to presence. Return to sufficiency. Return to the quiet truth that your identity is sourced in something stable. Over months, This practice reshapes your lived experience, not because you have forced outcomes, but because you have stabilized identity. Relationships reorganize around the new state. Work aligns more naturally. Decisions carry less anxiety. Even challenges feel different because they are met from coherence rather than fragmentation. You may still encounter difficulty. Coherence does not eliminate complexity, but it transforms your participation. You no longer interpret difficulty as confirmation of inadequacy. You interpret it as an event within a stable identity. The difference is profound. In this way, consciousness becomes sacred ground, not as abstraction, but as lived reality. Each moment offers the opportunity to consent anew, not frantically, quietly. Who am I being right now? What state am I inhabiting? Is this aligned with divine sufficiency? As these questions become natural, you will notice a deepening calm. The need to control softens. The urgency to prove diminishes. You move through the day with measured presence. You speak from steadiness. You listen without immediate defense. Gradually, you realize that the outer world has always been responsive to your inner orientation. Not in every detail, but in tone, in pattern, in rhythm. What once felt random begins to feel relational. Life is not opposing you. It is reflecting you. This realization is not meant to inflate ego. It humbles it. If your state organizes experience, then blame becomes unnecessary. You are neither victim nor omnipotent controller. You are participant. You are co-creative through consent. And so the work becomes beautifully simple. Guard the I am. Tend it with care. Do not attach it casually to passing moods or inherited narratives. Attach it deliberately to what is aligned with truth. Truth, in this sense, is not forced optimism. It is alignment with divine character sufficiency, steadiness, love, wisdom. When you say, I am held, and allow your body to soften into that statement, you are not pretending. You are orienting toward the deeper ground of being. Let this orientation become quiet and continuous. When you walk, feel the steadiness beneath your steps. When you speak, sense the presence from which words arise. When you rest, notice that awareness remains without effort. This awareness is not striving. It is, and in that simple being, creation unfolds. You do not need to chase outcomes. You need only remain coherent. You do not need to force belief. You need only return to the state you choose to inhabit, again and again, without drama. In time, the distinction between spiritual practice and ordinary life dissolves. Every moment becomes an opportunity for alignment. Every interaction becomes a mirror. Every challenge becomes a chance to reaffirm identity. You begin to live from the inside out, not as slogan, but as felt reality. The external no longer dictates your sense of self. The internal quietly shapes your experience of the external, and the cycle stabilizes. If you forget, you return. If you drift, you notice. If you attach I am to something misaligned, you gently detach and reattach. No condemnation, no urgency, just fidelity. This fidelity is faith, not belief in distant intervention, but steady allegiance to the identity rooted in divine sufficiency. Faith becomes the atmosphere of your awareness, and as you remain in that atmosphere, life reorganizes, not all at once, not theatrically, but faithfully. So now, as you sit with these words, allow your attention to settle inward. Feel the simple fact of being, before roles, before plans, before memory, just being. From this place, choose carefully what you will call yourself. Let the words arise slowly. Let them be true enough to inhabit. Let them carry steadiness. And then remain. Remain aware. Remain aligned. Remain consenting only to what reflects the divine ground from which you arise. The world you experience will follow the state you quietly sustain, not because you forced it, but because you became coherent. And coherence is creative. Rest there. Be still and know, I am. Remain with that simplicity a little longer. Do not rush to apply it. Do not turn it into a project. Let it breathe within you as a quiet orientation. The mind will want to convert this into steps, into strategies, into something measurable. But this realization is not mechanical. It is relational. It is the steady recognition that your lived experience is organized around the state of being you most deeply consent to as yourself. There is a tenderness required here, because when you begin to see that your inner allegiance shapes your outer world, you may feel a subtle grief. You may notice how often you have spoken against yourself, how casually you have attached I am to fatigue, to failure, to limitation, not out of malice, but out of habit. Habit formed in response to moments that felt overwhelming, moments when adopting a smaller identity felt protective. Allow that to be understood without judgment. The identities you adopted were attempts to survive uncertainty. If you once decided, I am not the kind of person who succeeds, perhaps it was after a disappointment that felt too sharp to risk again. If you once accepted, I am always the one who struggles, perhaps it was easier than hoping and being let down. These were strategies of the nervous system, not declarations of eternal truth. And yet, strategies repeated become identities assumed. This is why gentleness is necessary. You are not dismantling an enemy. You are releasing an outdated protection. The body does not relinquish protection through force. It relaxes when it feels safe. And safety is cultivated through consistency, not intensity. Consistency of awareness. Each time you notice a limiting identification and quietly decline to merge with it, you are signaling safety to your system. Each time you return to a steadier I am, you are building a new familiarity. The brain reshapes itself around repeated states. Neural pathways strengthen with use. What once felt foreign begins to feel natural. This is not mystical exaggeration. It is embodied law. But beyond neural pathways, there is something more subtle unfolding. When you stabilize a new identity rooted in divine sufficiency, you begin to experience yourself differently before anything changes externally. You may wake with less dread. You may respond with less defensiveness. You may feel a quiet steadiness in situations that previously unsettled you. The change is internal first. And because it is internal, it is sustainable. Notice how different this is from trying to force outcomes. Forcing outcomes is exhausting because it requires constant vigilance over what is outside you. Stabilizing identity is restful because it requires fidelity to what is within you. The former depends on variables you cannot fully control. The latter depends on your consent, and your consent is always available. This does not mean that you will never feel emotion. Emotions continue to move through you. Anger, sadness, uncertainty, these are part of human experience. But when your identity is anchored in something deeper, emotions become visitors rather than rulers. You can feel them without becoming them. You might say anger is present and still remain rooted in I am grounded. You might acknowledge this situation is unclear and still remain steady in I am guided. The emotion passes. The identity remains. Over time, this creates a profound shift in how you experience reality. Instead of reacting from reflex, you begin responding from orientation. Orientation is slower. It has space in it. It allows a breath between stimulus and reaction. In that breath, you remember who you are being. This remembering is sacred work. In the Gospels, when Jesus asks, "Who do you say that I am?" he is not collecting information. He is drawing attention to perception. Identity, both divine and human, is revealed through recognition, and recognition shapes relationship. In the same way, who you say that you are determines how you relate to life. If you say, "I am alone," you will relate to life defensively. If you say, "I am supported," you will relate to life with openness. The outer circumstances may appear similar, but your participation transforms the experience. There is a quiet courage in choosing a new identification before there is visible evidence. Not blind denial of facts, but allegiance to a deeper truth. When you say, "I am sustained," while still facing challenge, you are not ignoring the challenge. You are choosing